Thank you all for coming today, and thank you all who are online, joining us online. I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Sangseraima Ujeed. We are lucky to have her here first from the UK, University of Oxford PhD, came over before COVID and settled into Michigan, and we're lucky to have her here today at Columbia University. She works on early modern Tibetan Buddhism, Mongolian Buddhism in early modern Mongolia and Tibet, and the connections between these places and the lives of these important incarnations and other figures, especially Zaya Pandita. In this talk, we're moving from the 17th century period into the 18th and even into the 19th a little bit, with the Sixth Dalai Lama as he appeared in Alagśan. So we're very excited to have her here today. I think would it be fair to say that this is part of your work on the Mirror of Lives, the Tibetan Buddhism lineage and identity in the early modern period, this effort to connect literary works with these figures, or is this pushing beyond that?
So I think I have to say a couple of words on that note. That is no longer my current book project, but that will be my latest book project. So the current talk is about an article that's kind of connected to my current book project, which is really about the Dalai Lamas and the beginning of the Institute of the Dalai Lamas and reincarnation in the late 16th century. So I bounced all over the early modern period. So I should have probably update my page.
It's wonderful. I mean, it's a period in Tibetan and Mongol history that is neglected, and it's a watershed moment. We were just talking about the kind of origins of these reincarnation lineages, especially in this area of Kokonor, Amdo, Qinghai, whatever incarnation it has as a place name, but it's a very important period, and the richness of the the innovations that really happen in this area are really important. So I think that the presence of the Sixth Dalai Lama in the incarnation that appeared in Alagśan, that will be the subject of this talk, is really very important for moderating or mediating between China, Tibet, and Mongol territory. This is the crux, right? Alagśan is it's really understudied in Western academia, but it's the corridor that connects always Tibet essentially with Beijing and with Mongolia as well. So having such a central figure as the Sixth Dalai Lama in this place really brought a lot of the culture from these different areas together in an important way. So I'll turn the talk over to you.
Well, thank you, Gray, for that really generous introduction, and thank you also for inviting me here, and thank you, Lauren and Julie, for doing all of the organizations so I can actually be here. I'm very excited to be here in person. I gave a couple of talks online during the COVID years. So I'm just going to get started because I know you're here to hear about the Dalai Lama and not me. So as I mentioned, oops, let me just do my Zoom thing. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. So I think I need to give me 1 second. All right, that's all good. So as I mentioned, this talk is coming from an article that I've been working on, just in its finished form, about the lost lives of the Sixth Dalai Lama in Mongolia. There's many things to be said about the life of the Sixth Dalai Lama in Mongolia and the way that he's remembered and the role that this figure and his subsequent reincarnations, as well as the disciples that he discovered. Okay. And their reincarnations, but that's not something I can do in one talk. So today's talk is going to be focusing on some of the oral histories, the legends, the poems and the songs that have been preserved in Alagśa that relate to the Sixth Dalai Lama and some of the roles this plays in religion and politics in Alagśa. So we're probably all very familiar with this poem that's known as, or improperly known as Little White Crane. It kind of stands as the most well known and beloved of all the poems of the Sixth Dalai Lama, Tsangyang Gyatso. He is remembered in popular imagination and history as the lover, the renegade, and the tragedy. This poem is often cited as one of the key prophetic messages that he left behind about the location of his next rebirth. For the seventh Dalai Lama, Tsangyang Gyatso, would be born 2 years later in 1708 in Litang Kham. So, O bird, white crane, lend me your wings, I'll not fly far, from Litang I shall return. Contrary to this white crane that passed away in 1706, only to return to Lhasa after going through Samsara's trials of death and rebirth, the white crane of Alagśa in Mongolia is remembered as having continued to take flight, sing its songs for another 40 years in the desert realm of the southern Gobi. So in terms of the life of the Sixth Dalai Lama, there's two versions. There's a standard narrative as it's preserved in Uzang in central Tibet that follows the writings of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, the regent of the fifth Dalai Lama, and many other Tibetan and Mongolian lamas who followed this model for writing biographies of the sixth Dalai Lama. There's not many actual written versions beyond, at least contemporary to sixth Dalai Lama. That's the version by the Desi Sanggye Gyatso and the Alagśa Mongols, who were all contemporary of the sixth Dalai Lama. So in this version, he passed away in 1706 after being recognized in secrecy, lived in controversy, and then passed out of history shrouded in mystery, for a body was never recovered, but he's said to have disappeared or passed away in Huknord at another smaller lake known as Kunganord. The second version, which is the version that's preserved in Alagśa, and this is the life story of the Tsangyang Gyatso that's remembered in Alagśa to this day, says that he escaped his captors at Kunganord. There's a few different legends that talk about how he escaped. And in any case, he traveled throughout Tibet, Nepal, and parts of India, and then finally arrived in Alagśa in 1716, and then lived there for another 30 years and passed away in 1746. His reincarnation lineage was kept alive. Here we have his subsequent reincarnations, right until the time just before the Cultural Revolution. And the reason why there's not a current sixth Dalai Lama reincarnation in Alagśa is because of the current ban on reincarnations in China. So here we have one of the statues of the sixth Dalai Lama as preserved in the monastery that he founded in Alagśa, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. So my talk today isn't going to attempt to solve the mystery of what happened to the sixth Dalai Lama in Huknord, or whether this figure that turned up in Alagśa and claimed to be the sixth Dalai Lama was truly the sixth Dalai Lama that was exiled from Lhasa, but to really look at the impact, the memory of this figure had in local religion and politics in Alagśa, and the role that this played in the broader geopolitics of Qing, of Tibet and Mongolia, and how Alagśa built its identity as an authentic center of religion, also a center that's important for the geopolitics, and so forth. So I'll start off talking a little bit about Alagśa, its origins, and religion and politics in Alagśa. Then I'll talk about the creation of Alagśa as a sacred realm, a Buddhist central place, by looking at the oral traditions surrounding the sixth Dalai Lama in this region, and then looking also at the monasteries and religious sites that he's connected to in Alagśa. That's really embedded in oral histories, legends, and songs that kind of evolved in this region. Last, I'll talk about how the process of transplanting the past, present, and future lives of the Dalai Lama, as well as his interpersonal relationships in Alagśa, and what role this played in creating Alagśa as this authentic realm that's the realm of these Mongol lords ruling it. Okay, so my sources are the two written sources that we have access to about the life of this latter figure that didn't pass away, traveled all around meeting yetis and snow bears and so forth before arriving in the Gobi, is the Divine Tambura, written by Tsangyang Gyatso's disciple, Alagśa Nomenha Ngawang Lunjuk Dorje, who actually is the reincarnation of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, the regent of the fifth Dalai Lama. So we're talking about his reincarnations and how this master-disciple relationship helped in constructing this Alagśan realm later on. The second is the verse version of the biography, which follows the Divine Tambura quite closely, that was composed by the second reincarnation of the Sixth Dalai Lama in Alagśan. So he was known as the second Dakpo Watut, Lossen Tupten Gyatso. And it's requested, the verse biography was written at the request of about 7 individuals that were Gishis and a couple of Larambas who were resident at the monastery that the Sixth Dalai Lama founded in Alagśa. As well as these written sources, my main sources for this talk really are the oral histories, local legends from Alagśa, Orcus, as well as Huknor, as well as folk songs and poems that I collected during a field work trip, not just the field trip, to Alagśa in 2018. Since then, I have found out that the local Alagśan authors are gathering some of these oral narratives and compiling kind of printed versions and compendiums of these legends. So I haven't seen those yet because I haven't been back to Inner Mongolia since, but there's about 25 legends and stories that I was able to collect, and I've been told there's about 32 in total that can be gathered from some of these new printed compendiums. In any case, so I'm basing mine on what I was able to get access to in 2018. Oops. Okay. Anyway, so where is Alagśa located? It is located here. It's the most southwestern banner.
It's not showing up, but there.
Here we go. The mouse is better. So this kind of triangle in southwestern region of Inner Mongolia, so highlighted here is the entire Inner Mongolia autonomous region, is Alagśa. So as you can see, it really borders Eastern Tibet, or Huknor, this region that we consider as part of Amdo. And most of it is the Gobi Desert, but then the Helanshan Mountains start kind of halfway through the region. And if we just blow it up, then Alagśa itself is divided into 3 banners: the Western banner, the Eastern banner, and then the Ujine Hosho, the kind of the main central banner of Alagśa. So everything that we're talking about takes place just over here where I'm pointing my mouse, which is where the monastery known as Ujeed, or Tempa Dargeling in Tibetan, was established by the Sixth Dalai Lama. So again, it's very much bordering its neighboring banner, which is known as Orcus, which is another desert Gobi banner in Inner Mongolia. So that area will also come into significance as I go through my talk today. All right, so a little bit about Alagśa and its history. So Alagśa was one of the last regions in southern Mongolia to gain banner status from the Qing court, and this happened in 1697 when the first lord of Alagśa, whose name was Hadley, was gifted the region from the Qing emperor. And the lineage of Hadley is related to that of Gush Khan, who is the Hoshot Mongolian ruler who was settled in Huknor and helped the 5th Dalai Lama establish his Ganden Pojang government and settled in the Huknor region. So Hadley was a great-grandson of Gush Khan, so himself a Hoshot Mongol, which means the Hoshot Mongols were not descendants of Genghis Khan. It's not the direct Chinggisid bloodline. It's actually the Ujeed, which is one of the other major Mongol powers, but they weren't direct descendants of Genghis Khan. However, owed to some of the battles in which the grandsons of Gush Khan helped the Qing in, then Alagśa became a banner that was gifted from the Qing court. So at this point, Alagśa is now a region that's ruled by these Mongols, but its prominence didn't quite arise until later on in the 18th century, when the descendant of Hadley, Lofsung Dorje, won some great honors in the Jungar War as well as the Kazakh War on behalf of the Qing, and as a result married one of the daughters of the Qianlong emperor, whose name was Dakshin Gungju in Mongolian, that means a wild princess. And from that moment onward, he was granted the Junwang status, which happened in 1758. So this really marked the beginning of the fame of Alagśa as a significant power, as a region that also had direct relationship to the Qing court through marriage alliances. So it's in this period that we also get the first great monasteries being built in the region, and the kind of origin of the authenticity of these monasteries goes to the figure of the Sixth Dalai Lama, who arrived there a little bit earlier in 1716. So before we get to the Sixth Dalai Lama and his arrival in Alagśa, here is a song that is known as the Two Systems. This is the English for Shashintur, which in Tibetan would be Chersi Lugni, this ideal of government that's prolific across various Mongol as well as Qing courts. So this song, this is just the opening verses. May our great ancestors of Shashintur descend to our vicinity to listen to the truth, spoken by a virtuous Jinwangan lords who are descendants of Genghis. Like pure Chintamani jewels with qualities worthy of veneration, in northern Alagśa, the great refuge realm, the 16 Arhats reside in their caves, and there abides the precious Lord Dalai Lama, the crown ornament of the world, the manifestation of Avalokiteshvara, who fulfills the wishes of all beings. And the song was composed and first sung at what's known as a Festival of Descendants in Mongolian, that's Ursinner, that took place under the oversight of Junwang Lobsang Dorje, who I introduced in the previous slide. So having received status as a Junwang and son-in-law of the Qianlong Emperor, then he put on this kind of celebration of the Alagśan realm. And this was a song that was sung then, and every Ursinner since then sings a song at the beginning. Obviously, this has stopped currently, and now this song known as the Two System is more of a folk song that's prolific in the region. What's interesting to note is here, it's the great ancestors of Shashintur, i.e. the descendants of Genghis Khan, that are being praised first. And this is interesting because the Hoshok themselves were not direct descendants of Genghis Khan. Yet this is the highest object of praise before it moves on to Shashin, the religion part. And in the religion part, there are two highest objects of veneration in Alagśa. The first are the 16 Arhats, who are said to reside in caves meditating permanently since the time of the Buddha. And second is the Dalai Lama. This festival happened in 1766. So this would have been the moment when the seventh Dalai Lama is sat on the throne at the Potala Palace. So this Dalai Lama here for the Alagśans is no other than the sixth Dalai Lama, or his recent reincarnation. So one may ask, given that the Alagśan lords received their realm and were raised to the status because of the Qing Empire and the Qianlong Emperor, then why is it that it's the lineage of Genghis Khan and the Dalai Lama that's being praised as the origin of their kind of cultural pride and source of their identity? So there's some reasons behind this. One of them is the kind of continuing competition that's happening among the Gobi Mongols. And for here, we have to look at the neighboring state of, not state, sorry, the neighboring banner, Ortus. So we have Alagśa here, and next door we have Ortus. And if we blow Ortus up, this is what it looks like. And in Ortus, where I'm pointing my mouse, is a site known as the Arje Grottos, or the Arje Caves. And this area is significant because it's also a location where the 16 Arhats are said to be remaining in meditation. So in terms of Ortus, let's go back here for now. Ortus had been an important center for Buddhism, as well as a center for sustaining and continuing the Mongolian lineage of Genghis Khan since the time of Dain Han in the early 16th century. Ortus has also been an important center and a banner much earlier than Alagśa. Let me just quickly find my slide. Give me a second. Here we go. So since the 16th century, when the alliance between the Mongols and the Gaelic school were first built, the Ortus played a significant role in establishing this alliance. The Ordos rulers also had the position of the Jinung, which is kind of the second highest title after the Han in the Mongol Empire and the Yuan model. After Han met the third Dalai Lama and created this lineage of the Dalai Lamas, the Ordos rulers continued to build their relationship with the Dalai Lama. And in 1578, the Dalai Lama recognized the Ordos rulers, Potukte Sachin and Boshik Jinung, as the reincarnations of important past Indian Buddhist kings, Prasanajit and Mahasamatha. Later on, the Dalai Lama also spent a considerable amount of time in retreat in Ordos in 1582. And there he also helped the Ordos nobles establish monasteries modeled on the Jewel Shakyamuni temple in Lhasa. So from the 16th century onwards, based on the Buddhist activities that proliferated in Ordos and the great monasteries that were built by successive Ordos rulers, Ordos came to be known as the Jo Odin Chogelgan, literally meaning the banner known as a gathering of the Jewel Shakyamuni, or the retinue of the Jewel Shakyamuni. So since then, Ordos had become one of the most important centers of Buddhism, especially the Gaelic school in southern Mongolia. So this view continued to shape the Ordos Mongolian cultural identity and continues to do so today, especially at the time of the 18th century when Alagśa is first coming into its being as a banner. Then their immediate neighbors was a source of competition. So some of the legends that we'll be looking at reflect this competition between the Gobi Mongols and how Alagśa was able to build themselves up in this context. So what happened? So in one of the legends of the Sixth Dalai Lama finding his way to Alagśa, it said that after he escaped his captors as Kunganor, he was wandering aimlessly through a snowstorm, and suddenly he saw in the snowstorm a woman kind of appear in front of him, and she led him out of the snowstorm. After they exited the snowstorm, they found themselves at a lake, and this is said to be Lamotso, the great lake where Pandal Lama is said to reside in. The woman suddenly vanished, and instantly Pandal Lama appeared in front of the Sixth Dalai Lama and said to him, "I'm going to leave you, but from here you should go east, and you will approach a land which has a name beginning with the letter R. This is a land where the 16 Arhats remain in retreat, and there you'll find a mountain known as Tarbachok, in Mongolian known as Tarbchuk, but it's the Tibetan for the supreme liberation." Having said so, she reached into Lamotso, the lake, and brought out a rock that was the size of a bull and threw it to the northeast. She immediately vanished in a flash of white light. So based on this prophecy, the Sixth Dalai Lama wanders around until he finds a place where there's an old couple camping in a yurt. And he asks the couple, "What's the name of this place?" And the old couple says, "This name is known as Arbor," and Arbor refers to the mountain right over there behind us, and pointed to a series of flat-top mountains to the north. So Tsangyang Gyatso, the Sixth Dalai Lama, thinks, well, this place begins with an R, it's northeast of where I came from, so maybe this is a place where I'm supposed to settle and spread the Dharma. So he stayed a couple of nights with the elderly couple, and the next day the old man said to him, "You look like someone who has traveled a great distance, and your boots look like they're not going to last very long. So here's a brand new pair of boots." And at this, Sixth Dalai Lama thought, this is an omen that I'm not supposed to stay. The boots represent travel. So this can't be the place. So he left and went westwards. Interestingly, the Arbor Mountains, and I'll be showing some pictures in just a moment, are a series of flat-top mountains with cave monasteries in the neighboring state, Ordos. So this kind of, in the legends that we find in Alagśa, it's the idea that Ordos is not the place that the Dalai Lama was supposed to settle in. Instead, he'd arrive in Alagśa soon after. In any case, so Sixth Dalai Lama goes on, and then he finds another mountain with another elderly couple in a yurt offering milk to the mountain spirits. So he thought this was auspicious and said, "What's the name of this place?" And the old man answered, This place is known as Alagśa, and that mountain is also named Mount Alagśa, where the deity of the mountain, also called Alagśa, remains. And he thought, well, this also begins with the letter R, so I'll stay a couple of nights and see what happens. So they agreed, and he came inside, and they placed a brand new rug that had been kind of woven from goat cashmere to sit on. So he thought this is an auspicious omen that he was supposed to stay there. And he decided to remain in Alagśa instead of the Arbor Mountains in Ortus. So these competing legends from Alagśa and Ortus, which have disputed on which mountains the 16 Arhats remain in and which region has the oldest source of Buddhism, has been an ongoing narrative throughout the history of these two Gobi regions. So the first land that the Sixth Dalai Lama supposedly left behind is this site. This is known as the Alagśa Grottos in the Arbor Mountains in Ortus, pointed out here. And this is the mountain itself. There's three of these, but this is the main one. And inside the three mountains, there's said to be 108 caves. And inside the caves, there are various murals of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the 21 Taras, especially this cave, which is cave number 32, which depicts Sakya pantheon of high yoga meditation deities, but also the 16 arhats on the lower relief in the lower murals. So this is based on, again, this kind of legend we find in Ortus that the 16 arhats have been in these caves since the time of the Buddha. And the attendant of the 16 arhats, the Upashika Dharmatala, is said to come to this region as the attendant of these arhats and was active in this region. But obviously, according to the Alagśans, this is not the case, and it's in fact Alagśa. So if we turn to Alagśa, then this is said to be the Mount Alagśa. That's supposedly the mountain Tarbachok that the Palan Lama prophesied for the Sixth Dalai Lama to end up in. So we are looking at the location where my mouse is pointing over here. And here is the Mount Alagśa. And this is the location where, to this day, the monastery that was established by the Sixth Dalai Lama stands. It was destroyed, but it's been since rebuilt, and the rebuilding projects are ongoing. Up inside the mountain itself, there is also a cave, and this is said to be the residence of the 16 arhats, where we have images of the 16 arhats being worshipped there. And from the writings left behind by the Sixth Dalai Lama that turned up in Alagśa, we get narratives where he calls Alagśa the place where Dharmatala appeared and spread the religion during the time of the Tang dynasty, and has been there since. And he also identifies Dharmatala as a manifestation of Avalokiteshvara, again, linking the kind of sacred identity of Alagśa as an authentic place of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara to a much, much earlier period than even his arrival in Alagśa. So here we have Dharmatala and the 16 arhats that we find in the cave monastery of the Sixth Dalai Lama in Alagśa. Another site that is linked to the 16 arhats in Alagśa is the Sumut Agui, literally means the temple grottos in Alagśa. This is about 20 miles away from the monastery that was founded by the Sixth Dalai Lama. And there's about 18 caves on the side of these mountains. And again, a lot of it has been destroyed, but what this cave and the previous cave site in Ortus has in common is many of the reliefs that you can still make out date to probably the Tangut period, and then the later murals from the Tibetan Buddhist pantheon were added probably sometime around the 14th, 15th century during the Northern Yuan period. So these mountains and the Gobi, which, in this earlier phase is said to be completely devoid of religion during the dark age of Buddhism in Mongolia after the fall of the Yuan dynasty, clearly had continuity of religious practices and Buddhist activity linked to these regions. In any case, returning to Alagśa. So this is the scene from on top of the Tarbajuk mountain in Alagśa. And the legend continues. So according to the local legends, the Sixth Dalai Lama having stayed with these elderly couple for a couple of days, then climbed to the top of the mountain to see where he was at. As he was looking around, he discovered a mountain cave. And as he was about to enter the cave, he saw that there was a rock jutting out from the entrance that was a completely different type of rock and material to the mountain site itself. And he immediately recognized that this was the rock that was picked up by Palden Lama in Lama Tso and thrown to mark the place where he would end up to spread Buddhism. So he saw, well, this must be the place. There's auspicious signs from this elderly couple, but here's also the rock. So he went inside the cave, and the cave, as we see on the right here, was really the original monastery site. And this remained the original kind of temple where him and his disciples were meditating and exchanging teachings for about 30 years, while the monastery below would, then go on to be established. Here's the top of the rock. So you kind of climb up these stairs on the right, and then the cave monastery is on top. So the top of the rock has been left uncovered, and you can see some utensils for banging on it, some mallets. And again, the local legends say that if you bang on this rock, then you can hear the echoes of it in the Tuttle Palace, where the Sixth Dalai Lama used to live during his time in Lhasa. Here is a statue of the Sixth Dalai Lama that's being worshipped inside the cave monastery now. Obviously, it's very new because of the destruction the temple went through during the revolution period. So, having decided this is where he would remain, the Sixth Dalai Lama exited the cave, climbed on top of the mountain again, and then saw the region as the mandala of Avalokiteshvara, and saw this to be another potala on earth in the same way Lhasa is. So now with the Sixth Dalai Lama, then Alagśa is in essence also an authentic earthly residence of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. So at this point, the Dalai Lama still hasn't met any of the local lords. So what happens when he meets them? He doesn't immediately say, I am the Sixth Dalai Lama. It's said that for the next decade, he didn't want to be discovered, and he told everyone his name was Sangye, and Tibetan that means, in English, Tibetan name, which means lion, in the fear that people would discover who he was. So he also disguised himself as a beggar monk and was an itinerant monk wandering from place to place, sometimes returning to this cave. So many of these legends about his early days in Alagśa is filled with different miracles, like defeating fox demons and revealing kind of his cities to the local lords. And it's said that he was finally discovered, or his true identity was finally discovered by the princess, the Manchu princess that was married to Lobsang Dorje, who kind of tricked him into revealing who he was by kind of seeing what kind of cities he could perform. In any case, so like the Sixth Dalai Lama in Lhasa, the Alagśa Sixth Dalai Lama is also said to have been really artful at composing songs and poems. So this is said to be the song that he sung to the Alagśa nobles when he first met them. And it goes, with a sorrowful heart, I sing my tearful song. You who have gathered here, listen open-heartedly. I wandered here from the snowy land of Tibet. You were born in the remotest of borderlands. Though I've left my homeland behind, in my wise heart, there's 3 treasures of perfection. In my overflowing heart, 3 unforgettable memories, and in my forlorn heart, 3 painful maladies. Although the true name of your guest is difficult to discuss, when I remember the virtue, wisdom, and kindness of the incomparably gracious Panchen Lama Losang Yeshe, my heart yearns for and loves him more than my own mother. So although he's hiding his identity, you can read between the lines here, and it's pretty obvious who he is. He's alluding to himself as someone who escaped from the land of Tibet, whose main teacher is the Panchen Lama Losang Yeshe. He's kind of hinting at his identity as a Sixth Dalai Lama. In any case, the legends preserve him as having hidden his identity and benefiting the place and the beings in secret. So just to summarize some of his major deeds in Alagśa, so he appeared in 1716, and that very year he recognizes a child as a reincarnation of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso. We'll talk about him in just a moment. His true identity was discovered sometime later. We don't know the exact dates by Dokshin Gungju. When he arrives, he also chooses a location for Ujeed, which is known as the Western monastery that would become the kind of most important monastery in the Alagśan region. In 1735, he sends Dargye Nomenhan, who's the reincarnation of the Desi, to Lhasa to study. 36, he goes to Ortus to establish the Yarne practice in Ortus at the main monastery of Ortus. In 1737, he establishes the Monlam festival at Ujeed, according to the system of the Lhasa Monlam, again in this effort to recreate the religious system of Alagśa as one that reflects that of Lhasa. In 41, he goes to Ortus again to teach the lords there, and he finally passes away at Ujeed in 1746. So coming back to the establishment of his monastery, Ujeed. So as Tsangyang Gyatso exits the mountain cave and travels downwards, then it's said that two deities manifested to him, again giving him prophecies that this is the land that you're supposed to build your monastery. And the deities were Vajrapani and Hayagriva. And it's said that these two murals on the mountain were painted around the year 1747 after he passed away. And this was done under the guidance of his disciple, the reincarnation of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso. As for Ujeed Monastery, in Mongolian, it's known as Shashni Badruluksum. In Tibetan, as Khenpa Dargeling. And it's kind of referred to as a Potalaka in Alagśa. And although the work to build it started during the time of the Sixth Dalai Lama, it was actually completed a little bit later on after his death by his disciple Ngawan Dorje, the reincarnation of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso. It was completed in 1756, the same year that the second reincarnation of Tsangyang Gyatso would be invited to the seat of the abbot at Ujeed. Here's a picture of the monastery from, I believe, 1966, which was then offered to the monastery in 1981. So this is what it looked like before its destruction. So it was quite a large monastic center with many lecture halls and residence for monks. This is what it looks like today after some of the reconstruction efforts have completed or restored some of the temples. From above. And this is the kind of copy of the murals found in the Potala Palace, and this is found in the cave monastery site above the mountains. So the monastery, which I showed you just now, those kind of sit in the valley, and high above is a site where the initial cave monastery was founded by Tsangyang Gyatso upon his arrival. So we have the depiction of the Desi and Lazang Han, and the fifth Dalai Lama, and the Qing Emperor. So as well as legends that discuss how Tsangyang Gyatso, the sixth Dalai Lama, established the monastery, many of the other sacred sites around Alagśa are also linked to the sixth Dalai Lama and his travels to the region. So as well as the deities appearing to him and saying you need to build your monastery here, we also have the Arbor, which are cairns that are significant for mountain deity worship, which also have a Buddhist manifestation as kind of Buddhist mountain deities and protectors of the land and the religion. And here we have three Arbors known as the Shorgolin Arbor, and the Jun Heshkin Monjelingin Sum, and the Bayin Undur Arbor. There are others, but these three are said to be sites where, firstly, the one at the bottom here, Shorgolin Arbor, is where the sixth Dalai Lama stopped to make tea from a spring on top of the mountain. This Arbor is currently still active and is worshipped on the 15th day of the third lunar month of every year. The second site actually has three Arbors. which is linked to another monastery that again has origin myth linked to the Sixth Dalai Lama's arrival in Alagśa. And it's also currently an active Arbor with worship, and I don't know the exact dates of the worship of this site. So in any case, all around the kind of sacred landscape of Alagśa, there are legends and myths associated with the Sixth Dalai Lama and how he's linked to these sites. It doesn't just stop in Alagśa. For the Alagśan people, projecting the Sixth Dalai Lama's kind of identity back to his time in Lhasa, as well as throughout his travels in India and in Amdo, also serves the purpose to maintain the authenticity of this figure and his kind of legitimacy as the Sixth Dalai Lama. So one example I'll share is about the girl named Champa. So in the songs of the Sixth Dalai Lama, as they've been preserved down to us, there are many, many songs where Champa is mentioned, which literally means love or lover, depending on how you read it in these contexts. But for the Alagśan people, the legend refers to a girl known as Champa. So this isn't just love or a lover, but rather a particular individual. And according to this legend, long before the Sixth Dalai Lama was revealed as the Dalai Lama, he had a lover called Champa, a girl from his village where he was growing up. After he was revealed as the Dalai Lama, he was forced to go to Lhasa and the girl was left behind. But this girl, heartbroken and unable to give up her love, came to find him in Lhasa and started working as a servant in a beer house in the lower district of Lhasa. So one day, the Sixth Dalai Lama was out circumambulating in a palanquin and he saw her in the beer house. And this is why he started to sneak out every night to see her. And it wasn't just any other girl, but rather his childhood love that he couldn't let go of. And again, it's this idea that's challenging this Sixth Dalai Lama figure that was, seen as a rebel, kind of a bad Dalai Lama by the Tibetans, the Mongols, and the Qing at the time. So one song which I will translate for you is, I sought a renowned Lama requesting his spiritual guidance, but though my thoughts do linger, it's of no avail. And they steal their way back to Champa. And Champa in Alagśa is the wife or the long-time lover of the Sixth Dalai Lama. The legends continue and try to again explain why the Sixth Dalai Lama renounced his monastic vows. And here it gets into the tantric realm. And the legend goes that back in Lhasa, the Sixth Dalai Lama was trying to perfect a tantric practice that would, if perfected, would lead to the avoidance of war and a time of peace in Tibet. And it would also open the treasury of the Naga king. And the individual who's perfected the practice could use the treasury of the Naga king for anything that he wanted. But in order to do this, he needed to have a son that was of his blood. And this son would also go on to perform siddhis and would be a powerful tantric master. And without having a son, it wouldn't be possible to complete the practice. So this is another reason why he had to take a wife, this girl Champa, and have a son with her. And this is explained from the Alagśan perspective as the reason why he renounced his monastic vows and led to his expulsion from Lhasa and his seat and his position as the Dalai Lama. The legend also goes on to explain the story of his death, saying that the Manchu soldiers, after they chased the Dalai Lama out, they killed his pregnant wife and cut open her stomach. And from her stomach came out a fetus that was holding a bow and an arrow in the tantric siddha posture. And the soldiers soon realized what he'd done. So this is why they decided not to kill the Dalai Lama en route to Beijing and let him escape. The legend also says that because the son was not born, his practice was not completed. And this is why the subsequent wars broke out all over Tibet. And having now arrived in Alagśa, this is why there's a time of peace and prosperity for the Alagśan people who, took in this Dalai Lama who'd been expulsed for the wrong reasons from Lhasa. So I recently found out that the Huknor Amdo Cultural Association made musical, dance, theatrical version of the life of the Sixth Dalai Lama that was shown a couple of years ago. I haven't seen it myself, but this is a scene depicting his love for Champa, according to this legend that thrives in the Kuknor region as well. So what we see is this effort to not only consolidate Alagśa as an authentic realm that's a Putalaka on earth, resident of Avalokiteshvara, that's a central Buddhist place that can compete with its neighbors in Ortus and Tibet, but also projecting this figure and his identity as an authentic Buddhist teacher back to his time in Lhasa that's, prolifically painted as one where he's a rebel, doing what he likes, drinking, shooting, hunting, and having many, many, many lovers. It becomes a very, respectful figure. Okay, so the Alagśan people doesn't stop us simply transplanting the Dalai Lama and Avalokiteshvara in Alagśa, but goes further to transplant also the inner circle and the connected lives of the Sixth Dalai Lama in Alagśa. So Ngawan Dorje, also known as the Eruluksen Bandita Ertun Naman Ha Ngawan Nunjuk Dorje, a title given to him by the Panchen Lama, the second, or in the other numeration, the fifth Panchen Lama. So this is the figure that the Sixth Dalai Lama recognized as the reincarnation of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso upon his arrival. So according to that legend, the Sixth Dalai Lama arrived at the tent of Arbor, a local lord of the Taiji status in Alagśa. And he came into his tent to have tea, and there was a newly born son who was crawling around, was around the age of 1. He crawled onto his lap and peed on his lap, which was seen as very auspicious by the Sixth Dalai Lama as well as the parents. The version that's not preserved in the textual tradition is that this child also started crying when the mother tried to lift him up because he just peed on the Dalai Lama's lap, or the lap of a wandering monk. And when the boy cried out, the Sixth Dalai Lama recognized the voice of this child as the voice of the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, and immediately realized this is the reincarnation of the Desi, and told the parents of this child that once he's more settled, he'll become the teacher of this child and will raise this child because he's an important reincarnation of the regent of the fifth Dalai Lama. So this boy grew up to be one of the most important scholars from the Alagśa region from the 18th century. He was sent to Lhasa to study with the Panchen Lama by the sixth Dalai Lama. And himself, well, the boy being from a noble ancestral background meant that he was also seen as a local Alagśan lord. So he occupied both the position of a religious source of authentic religion and teachings, as well as someone who was powerful in local politics. He was also the cousin of the Junwang Lopsang Dorje, who established this, feast of the Festival of the Descendants, and was married to the daughter of the Qianlong Emperor. So this incarnation lineage is also kept alive to this day. So I don't have all the pictures and I forgot my list. So we have here a photograph of the 5th reincarnation of the Desi. And here in this tiny picture, so I couldn't find my bigger picture, is the most recent reincarnation known as Jalsan, who actually passed away in I believe it was in 2000, in the early 2000s. I can't remember the exact date. And the reason being, this reincarnation had already been recognized when the Cultural Revolution took place. So although he was not recognized officially, he was recognized locally, and he carried out his rest of his life as both a professor and a scholar and a reincarnate Lama in the Alagśan region. So currently both seats, both reincarnations are empty because the ban on discovering new reincarnations in Inner Mongolia generally. But going back to the first reincarnation of the Desi, just to give you an example of how lives are interrelated in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So starting with the Buddha himself, we have the Jatakas, which account the previous life stories of the Buddha and how different individuals are interconnected throughout lifetimes. This became the basis of a genre of literature in Tibetan Buddhism known as Chungrab, which literally means account of previous lives. And in the Chungrab of the Dalai Lama and the Desi, we have them manifesting simultaneously throughout different lifetimes. A few examples include when the Dalai Lama was born as a mythical god king Gonchok Wangni, the Desi was born as his magical steed. When the Dalai Lama was the Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo, the Desi was born as his son, Gungli Gungten. When the Dalai Lama was born as Sakya Pakpa Lama, the Desi was born as the Mongolian Hublai Han. And during the lifetime of the third Dalai Lama, the Desi was born as the Mongol Altan Han. So their lives have been interconnected in the writings of the fifth Dalai Lama, the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, as well as the disciples of the fifth Dalai Lama. So these versions were written around the 1580s, somewhere between 1680 and 1700. But later on in Alagśa, we have this relationship manifesting again in the form of the sixth Dalai Lama who didn't pass away, and the Desi being reborn as Ngawang Lunjuk Dorje. So this relationship is also used to explain the death of Ngawang Dorje. So Ngawang Dorje, being this prolific scholar and political figure in Alagśa, was a threat to the Junwang Lobsang Dorje, and they were cousins. So this competition started to grow until it kind of boiled over. And again, basically in a nutshell, what happened was the Junwang Lobsang Dorje had the reincarnation of the Desi locked up in a mud hut without windows or doors and starved him to death in the Gobi. So that's truly what happened. But again, according to the local legend, it's explained using the previous life stories from the time of the sixth Dalai Lama and the Desi in Tibet. So here in this mural, we have Lazang Han, the Hoshot ruler ascending from Gushan that was settled in Huknor, and the Desi Sanggye Gyatso in his previous incarnation. So according to this legend, Ngawang Dorje and the Junwang were actually very, very close. And in fact, when the Junwang went to the Jungar War, Ngawang Dorje supplied him with an amulet that protected him from any danger. And this was why he was able to succeed and win all these honors from the Qing and became a Junwang and married the princess. However, later on, it's said to be his ministers and inner circle that got threatened by Ngawang Dorje's rising fame and decided to get in the way. So a number of local lords told the Junwang that Ngawang Dorje had been performing black magic rituals to harm the Junwang, and that he should take some action to show everyone who's actually the lord of this region. So Ngawang Dorje felt that his safe return from the Jungar War was owed to his cousin. The Junwang thought this. And he also contemplated the proverb, brothers become enemies, kindness is returned with cruelty. But to this, the Junwang subordinates continued to insist on a demonstration of authority and asked him to contemplate the proverb, mess with the Lord and lose your head, mess with a dog and lose your skirt. Again, many of these legends are full of kind of Mongolian proverbs that are quite unique to the Gobi region. The Gobi Mongols are also really renowned as like loving proverbs during festivals, parties, and drinking, together with friends. You often break out in song or proverbs as kind of like, the party trick. In any case, so convinced by his subordinates, the Junwang decided to have Ngawang Dorje arrested. However, he tried to create a loophole by telling his guards, when you go to Ujeed, the monastery that he established, if anyone, no matter their rank or position, whether a monk or a cook or a servant, tries to stop you from arresting him, don't do it. If no one stops you, then arrest him. And he thought, well, this monastery is full of monks. He's not going to get arrested. Then the legend goes on, and when the guards approach Ujeed, the monks in there are unaware this is happening. Suddenly, the disciplinarian of the monastery started to shake uncontrollably. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he fainted. And then he suddenly came back to and said, everyone gather in the main temple and recite your morning prayers, and no one is allowed to exit until I say so. So everyone is like locked inside the main temple. And the guards turn up and they find the entire monastery empty. They go to the quarters of the abbot. They arrest Ngawang Dorje and they go back to the Junwang. After he's been taken away, suddenly the disciplinarian again faints, yawns, and looks around as if he'd just woken up from a dream and said, "What time is it? What are you all doing here? Sitting around and chanting morning prayers in the middle of the day." And at this, all the monks were really confused. And then the disciplinarian looked towards the door, the gate, the main entrance of the temple. He went pale and he started screaming, "Lazanghan, Lazanghan." He just ran out the door, "Go catch him, go catch him." And then he fainted. So again, this kind of demonstrates how despite it's this Junwang, who's a source of Alagśan pride, who built Alagśa as this realm, who also built another monastery known as Ujeed, the Eastern monastery, almost in protest of Ujeed, the monastery established by the Sixth Dalai Lama. The locals still don't want to, or they're attempting to paint him in a authentic light and attributing the reason why the reincarnation of the Desi passing away to the previous life stories, where Lazanghan executed the Desi Sanggye Gyatso in his previous life, so here is again attempting to harm him. So I'll stop there with the legends and come to my conclusion. So after the Cultural Revolution, well, at the time of the Cultural Revolution, let's go back there, in 1966, as aspects of the revolution started to sweep through southern Mongolia, the Ujeed monastery was destroyed, and the stupa in which the Sixth Dalai Lama's body that was in the meditation posture that had been embalmed, had been kept since his death in 1746, was opened up. And according to an eyewitness account, as the stupa came down, everyone saw the body of the Dalai Lama who'd been embalmed sitting in the meditation posture, just as he'd passed away in it. His hair was long and white and trailed down around him. His arms were crossed across his chest in the teaching mudra, and his skin still had a glow, and he didn't look like someone who'd passed away over 200 years ago. One of the revolutionaries used a bayonet and cut into his body, and fresh blood flowed out from the cut. This scared the revolutionaries and demanded that the body be immediately burned. His body was burnt, and the golden stupa was totally demolished. But in the middle of the night, one of the monks snuck out to the site of the cremation, gathered up the relics that had emerged, as well as any intact pieces of bone, and hid them away in a cave until the revolution was over. After the revolution, the efforts to restore the monasteries and historical sites slowly moved across the affected areas. And in Ujeed, the first item to be restored, first object of veneration to be restored, was the stupa of Tsangyang Gyatso. And this is how it stands today. And in fact, it stands on the site where his body was cremated, and the relics have been gathered and enshrined in a new golden stupa in the main temple of the monastery. What we can also see around the back of the stupa are the remains of the old monasteries, the tiles from the roof tiles of the temples that have been kind of, mosaicked into this wall that surrounds the golden stupa that marks the site of the body being built. So this was the first stupa to be, or the first structure to be renovated in Ujeed. Soon afterwards, a new stupa was also created for the reliquary of Dorje, the reincarnation of the Desi, which also, which had actually survived, unlike that of the Sixth Dalai Lama. The restoration of the monasteries continue in Alagśa, but again, the reincarnations have not been rediscovered because of the ongoing ban. But to the Alagśan people, these legends, these stories, and the identities of these figures of the Sixth Dalai Lama, his subsequent reincarnations, as well as the reincarnation of Desi and his subsequent reincarnations, have continued to represent the center of their local identity, the identity of the region as an authentic Buddhist realm, going way back before the time of establishment of Alagśa, even as a banner. And these narratives are told during festivals and parties, and the songs, again, you can hear the echoes of them around the yurts of the people, the elderly, as well as the young people. The recent efforts to also collect these narratives and print them, instead of just letting them transmit orally as they have done for generations, is again symptomatic of attempting to preserve these narratives, which are so essential to the history of the Alagśan people and their identification as part of not only the Qing, but also the wider Buddhist network of the Gelug tradition. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much for this fascinating talk and filling in a gap that I've long been curious about this area, but your narrative today fills in information that I had no idea about, and maybe it's because of this oral quality to the information. I have poked around on Google Maps to try to figure out where some of these sites were, but not understood, and not been able to sort of bring the significance to these sites. So I wanted to open it up to the audience online to start putting questions into the Q&A section of the Zoom portal. I see there's one there already, but if you wanted to type those in, I will try to moderate in the time that we have left. But also, I mean, I have a lot of questions myself, but I want to open it up to the floor as well if others have questions at the outset. Charlotte, please.
Thank you very much for the lecture and bringing the story, the history out about the place Alagśa. So I have a question about how do you consider whether there is a political intention of Tsangyang Gyatso went to Alagśa, because in one of the poem you showed us, he actually said some borderland. So I think he actually know that that the Alagśa's location as a border for somewhere. So I wonder what do you think about that? And also from the question, I wonder the military importance of Alagśa in the means of how it stands for Manchu forces or other foreign forces, and maybe also like what is the difference between the two places in this sense?
So the borderland question actually is a narrative that goes back much further and has a long history. And the term borderland, or the savage borderlands, or the uncivilized lands, has often been translated as a term used for Mongols generally. So anywhere that is, devoid of Buddhism is seen as a borderland according to the Buddhist narrative. So in many of the texts that we have about history of Buddhism in Mongolia, Mongolian regions are borderlands until Buddhism arrives there. So it's again alluding to this idea that this is a borderland because currently there's no monasteries, there's no monks. It's a recently evolved banner, yet with the arrival of Tsangyang Gyatso, the Sixth Dalai Lama, then it will no longer be a borderland. So it's again kind of alluding to his arrival. So that borderland term, it's not necessarily border from the center being Lhasa or Beijing, but rather it's a place devoid of Buddhism. So it's in a Buddhist context. In terms of the military power, again, the whole reason why Alagśa became a banner is because of the military support that lords were able to show to the Qing. Again, as Gray mentioned earlier, Alagśa is really on the border before you enter the Himalayan plateau. And everyone has to travel through there to get to Bukhnor, which is where the Hoshot was still set up with their government, and then further along to Utsang in central Tibet, and further north to Mongolia, Beijing, and so forth. So having this military presence there is important for the Qing, which is another reason why this became a banner so late on after the establishment of the Qing Empire. If you're interested in this, there are the Qing archives of the Alagśa region, which have all been published now as new reprints. Again, some parts probably are missing, but there's a lot of accounts related to, requesting horses, requesting military weapons, and so forth. I've only looked through them for, information about monks and reasons for religious travel. There's quite a few, but if you're interested in kind of the more military impact Alagśa had after 1766, then you can probably find it there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question.
The first question is in Mongolian. I will let you do that.
Okay. So the question is, are the relics of Tsangyang Gyatso in Monjiling Sum, which is a monastery that he's also held in connection with an Alagśa, or at Ujeed? So according to the Ujeed monks, the relics are at Ujeed. But I have heard from monks in Ortus that because the body was cremated and the relics were hidden away in secret by this monk, then it was also, kind of divided out amongst people. In fact, a monk that I know in Ortus claims to have one fraction of his skull that was recovered, and he has it on his altar at home. So it's possible that there are other relics at other monasteries other than Ujeed. But Ujeed was where the original embalmed body was enshrined in a stupa. So this golden stupa that's at Ujeed, and the reliquary stupa is also currently enshrined in the main temple at Ujeed.
Thank you so much for your presentations. I really didn't know that Sixth Dalai Lama spent so many life years in Alagśan. And according to the Dalai Lama's reincarnations, one death, then following 1 or 2 years, there's another one. And according to this seventh Dalai Lama, Kazon Gyatso, is according to the first the version of the story. And then it doesn't fit for next one. Then how do you justify this, and how do people look at, because of this reincarnation time doesn't match for this eighth?
Yes, this is a great question. And I think there are other articles that try to, talk about this. And so I'll kind of summarize what I know in my stance briefly. So as for the Sixth Dalai Lama, after he was deposed in 1706, the Lazang Han established his son, Yeshe Gyatso, as the true Sixth Dalai Lama. So the argument was Tsangyang Gyatso was a fake, which is why he was a renegade and not ideal as the Lama, because the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, the regent, made a mistake. So the regent has also been executed. So now we have, a vacuum into which Lazang Han can place his son, a Mongolian prince. This didn't do so well from the Qing perspective, because now you have a Mongolian prince sitting on the throne in the Potala, and you have Huknor being ruled over by his father. So Yeshe Gyatso was soon deposed, and Khalsan Gyatso, the seventh Dalai Lama, was initially enthroned as the sixth Dalai Lama, and then later after the Jungar War, he was re-enthroned as the seventh Dalai Lama, because the dates kind of align with the death of the sixth if he passed away at Kunganur, and the birth of the seventh, Khalsan Gyatso. So at the time of the sixth Dalai Lama who turned up in Alagśa, then initially there was Khalsan Gyatso on the throne in Lhasa, and then he passes away, and then we have the eighth Dalai Lama, as you mentioned. And one might think there would have been some issues if they met, but they did meet. So the sixth Dalai Lama from Alagśa traveled to Lhasa more than once. He was also active in Amdo and Huknor, and there's also a couple of monasteries in the Huknor region that he established and had disciples there. It's said that when he first arrived in Alagśa, he had 100 disciples with him, some of them from Huknor. So again, we don't know for certain, but this is what the sources say. As well as that, the sixth Dalai Lama also traveled to Beijing a number of times, the Alagśa version, and he had close relationships with the leader of religion in Mongolia, the Jitundampa Hotukt. So it seems like there were interactions between these individuals, and it wasn't really an issue for those who saw these figures to be authentic. The Qing emperor also tried to keep the sixth Dalai Lama in Beijing and establish him as one of the Beijing Hotuktos, but he refused and came back to Alagśa and said, this is where I'm prophesied to, be active in my religious activities. So I refused to remain in Beijing. So it seems that whether he was truly the sixth Dalai Lama or not, the fact that he was held in high regard by the Mongols from the southern Gobi as well as Huknor, he had a significant influence over these people. So the Qing were also trying to co-opt that. And this is also reflected in the title his subsequent reincarnations received, which is the Dakpo Hotukt. And the Dakpo Hotukt is a very high-class reincarnation title in the Gelug system of reincarnations, as well as Hotukt being one of the highest anyway. The Dakpo adds a level of prestige. So he's not allowed to be the Dalai Lama because now we have an alternate Dalai Lama lineage, but he's still held in a high position, or he received a high position from the Qing court. So it's very interesting that somehow, in the writings of these figures, it didn't matter so much, especially for the followers of these figures and their disciples, the fact that there's multiple incarnations is not that big a deal. It may be because, and again, I'm speculating here, the idea of enlightened beings being able to manifest in multiple bodies in the mortal or like the conventional realm is totally possible. So if there's an Avalokiteshvara here, it doesn't mean the other one is inauthentic. Yeah.
We have some more questions from online, but my question for you kind of follows up with that one so well, I wanted to ask it as well. So with these figures, I mean, did the local people kind of, even if he was called the Dakpo Hututu, did they also kind of say he's our local Dalai Lama in over the generations up to maybe today? And with the Desi Sanggye Gyatso, when other people traveled through this area, have you tried to look at their biographies to see, like, did they acknowledge that the Desi Sanggye Gyatso had a reincarnation in this place, and how did they how did they refer to the Dakpo Hututu as, like, I mean, I'm trying to think. I looked at the fifth Dalai Lama when he traveled, his biography when he traveled through this area, but I haven't looked at later figures. So was there a kind of acknowledgement from Central Tibetan writers and thinkers that these guys were here, and did they kind of process that?
That's a great question. And I haven't looked as extensively as I'd like to at this point. But from my understanding, the Dalai Lama reincarnations are always referred to as the Dalai Lama. And the sixth Dalai Lama was always referred to as Sixth Dalai Lama Tsangyang Gyatso. So the Dakpo Hututu was really more of a, official title that would be on letters and so forth. And then as for the Desi reincarnation, the Mongolian pronunciation of Desi is Desri, and he is to this day referred to as the Sri Hotut. So for the Alagśan people, as well as Artus, because the neighboring Artus region, there were really close connections between the monasteries of Alagśa and the monasteries in Artus, and these figures traveled really extensively between these regions. They also referred to these two figures in that way. I'd have to look more in Hoknor, because that's the other neighboring region on the western side. But I haven't found anything from the writings of Sumpa Khenpo or the Leila reincarnations who are writing in this period that mention these figures. They seem to follow the writings of the first Desi, the regent's version, where the sixth Dalai Lama passes away, and there's really no mention of these figures. And I've also been interested to think, did Yeshe Gyatso, this second candidate for the Dalai Lama that Lazang Han enthroned, did he ever meet seventh Dalai Lama or this initial sixth Dalai Lama? Because they were all alive at the same time for quite some decades. But we don't really know, because we don't have any, writings, at least that I'm aware of at the moment, that mention this. So, but yeah, I'd love to find more.
Yeah. So Susan Meinheit wrote to ask, where are the legends being published, and are they easily obtainable via China? Thanks for the great talk.
So they're being published locally in Alagśa. I think if we're able to get them anywhere outside of China, then it'd be through this website, Confucius. I can't remember the site, but there's a website that sells old books in languages other than Chinese in China. And I think they do ship elsewhere, or there's vendors who are able to ship them according to the right way to ship things out of China for you. So that's the only place I think you'd be able to get them. I myself don't have access to these versions yet, because my versions were collected in person from interviewing people. One thing I will say about the interviews I conducted is interviewing someone in their 80s and comparing that to the versions of the stories told by someone in their early 30s or late 20s. They were very, 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 like, almost identical. And then this also is reflected in like the proverbs and the songs. So in these regions, orality does seem to be like the main way in which history and kind of identity, politics, and so forth is preserved. So I'd love to compare the versions as they are published to see how they compare to the oral traditions, but really generations apart, it seems to be almost identical, like almost identical. Maybe sometimes it's the top of a peak that's thrown by Palden Lama instead of a rock from a lake, but the rest of the stories, it's really astonishing. And this is true also for versions of these stories found in the neighboring region in Ortus. So across the Gobi, it's kind of been preserved for these centuries in an oral way.
Okay. Pelvin Gill is also writing, and actually, anyone here have questions before I bring in the outsiders? So Pelvin Gill is writing with a question about Pekar Dzimpa, Lhatsan Khan's Sixth Dalai Lama was brought. He's saying he was brought to Beijing and appears to have traveled to various places, including residing in Chengde. He passed away sometime in the 1740s. Do you believe that these narratives about the Sixth Dalai Lama are linked in any way to Pekar Dzimpa? Additionally, are there any monasteries or sacred sites outside of Alagśa and the Ordos that have connections to or share similar legends about the Sixth Dalai Lama? And if I can tack on a question, so I've heard of at Utaishan, there's the cave where the Sixth Dalai Lama was supposed to have stayed. Is that this Sixth Dalai Lama or this Sixth Dalai Lama or yet another one? Do you know?
So there are legends of this Sixth Dalai Lama, the Alagśan Sixth Dalai Lama going to Utaishan. So it's listed on one of the places he traveled to. There is a map that shows all of the places he traveled to according to the written version of his biography. That's written by the reincarnation of the Desi. I couldn't find a copy that looked clear enough because it was black and white. So people have tried to identify the places where he's traveled to. However, we also know this other Sixth Dalai Lama was also active. So do we know for certain which one is which? I'm not sure. But in the written version of this Alagśa Sixth Dalai Lama's life story that was completed, a year after he passed away by his disciple, it does say he went to Utaishan. As for the local, more like neighboring regions, then in Hoknor, there are legends of, I can't remember the name of the monastery now, but there is a monastery that's not too far from Kumbum that the legend goes that it was a very small temple, but because the Sixth Dalai Lama arrived to give a teaching, 500 people showed up and they couldn't fit. So he magically expanded the monastery, like enlarged it on the spot so 500 people could fit. And to this day, the local legends say this monastery structurally doesn't have enough pillars to hold up such a big temple. However, it does. And, it's survived, and it's because of the cities of the Sixth Dalai Lama. And then in Ortus, there are more because the Sixth Dalai Lama did spend considerable amount of time in Ortus and traveled then, established the Yarne, the rainy season kind of reciting ritual or festival at Ushinjo, which is the main monastery in Ortus. It's the earliest one that was built in 1582 by the third Dalai Lama. And we also know that there were different nobility from Ortus receiving initiations and tantric teachings from the Alagśa Sixth Dalai Lama. The Alagśa Sixth Dalai Lama also left behind a number of writings. I've only seen 4 of them, though mostly ritualistic in nature. The one that really drew my interest was the liturgy of the Gur Mahakala, so the Tanja Nata Mahakala, which was very important for kind of Yuan Buddhist identity and kind of the Hagans of the Yuan and their court, and is a deity that's related to Vajra. So this was also a deity and practice that was really forefronted at the time of the third Dalai Lama and his interactions with the Mongol princes. So here again, we have that being kind of replicated by the Sixth Dalai Lama in Alagśa, because this liturgy was also written for the Alagśan nobility so that they could receive this practice from the Sixth Dalai Lama. So again, it's just kind of, rebirth, I guess, or reincarnations of past narratives and politics in this region.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the talk. I just have a very interesting question about have actually anyone tried to compare the writings of the Sixth Dalai Lama written in Lhasa or like the poems that have been really widely circulated with the writings of the Alagśan Sixth Dalai Lama, and if like studies like that have been conducted, are there any interesting findings? Yeah, thank you.
That's a great question. I think the problem is there are just over 300 poems that are attributed to the Sixth Dalai Lama from Lhasa that have been preserved. in various collections. The 300 plus is the largest one, but there's also a collection of 99. There's an early collection of 50. But it's hard to say if they were all actually written by the Sixth Dalai Lama or if they were written about the Sixth Dalai Lama by subsequent Tibetans. So because of that, it's very difficult to then compare those with the writings of the Sixth Dalai Lama and Alagśa. The only thing that can be said is the Sixth Dalai Lama and Alagśa also wrote many poems and sang many songs, or at least he's remembered as doing so. So that's the only kind of comparison we can make. Also because the version of the Sixth Dalai Lama's life story where he passed away at 24, and he hadn't gone through his full monastic ordination. So he left behind very little writing in terms of actual histories or liturgies or commentaries or kind of, religious literature that a Buddhist polymath, including his previous incarnation, the fifth Dalai Lama, would have left behind. So we don't have access to that much actual kind of writing that could show us something about his writing style and so forth. All we have are these songs. And again, because they're difficult to say which one's definitely by the Sixth Dalai Lama, it would be difficult to compare with, the versions that we have in Alagśa. Yeah. But I wish we could, because that would be...
There are oral versions that people still remember in Alagśa. As you travel around, they say, hey, this is a song that was sung by the
Yes.
Sixth Dalai Lama.
Yeah. So this song that I showed you that he sung to the nobles when he arrived, that's a song.
Preserved by oral tradition.
Preserved by the oral tradition. Yeah. In terms of written, so in the biography written by his disciple in 1747, there are songs and poems that are said to have been by the Sixth Dalai Lama, but those are more preserved as poems. Those aren't sung as much. Some little lines are that always talk about the Dalai Lama, Avalokiteshvara, and how the four directions of Alagśa is pristine and has mandalas of all these deities. And then there are a couple of songs that were sung by also his disciple, Ngawan Dorje. There's one that's really famous that's known as the Wheel of Samsara that I was going to read out earlier, but it's the last song or poem, the last thing he wrote in prison before he passed away from starvation. And it's called The Wheels of Samsara, and it talks about the black and white karmas and people not abiding with the Buddhist teachings. But what does one have to fear if you've abided by those values? Then there's no fear of going to hell. And then he kind of dies in this prison. So that one is also a very popular Alagśan song. So there are songs by the six, as well as the Desi or Tuttles that are kind of prolific among the local tradition to this day. Yeah.
We have a manuscript version of an account of the Sixth Dalai Lama's death in our library here. Significance was lost on me, but Pema Boom has read through it. And we've digitized it. I think it can be found in our digital collections here. Yeah. But it's written by his Solpun, the Sixth Dalai Lama's Solpun, and it gives the account of his death and all the details. I just wondered how widely known is that text? Is this, and how is that accounted for? And then if you'd also be able to speak to the connections with Lhasa. When you say people go to Lhasa, do they go to Ganden Monastery? Do they go to Drepung? What were the institutions in Lhasa with which those connections were strongest with Alagśan?
So I haven't read that myself. I've heard of it, and I think I've seen it paraphrased in a couple of articles where it's about his body being destroyed and that kind of circumstances surrounding his death. That's a manuscript, right? I would love to see it if I can, I just couldn't get access to it when I was searching for it, like, a couple of years ago when I first came across this material. In terms of that text and people from Alagśa or these regions, I don't think they know anything about it. The versions, again, are more orally transmitted, and they kind of put the crime in the court of the Qing emperor to say he was the one trying to get rid of the Sixth Dalai Lama. So they even evade kind of putting the responsibility on the Mongols who, had actually assassinated the regent as well. In terms of Mongols going to Lhasa for pilgrimage, it's earlier on during the 17th century, it was actually Tashilumpo. So we always think about Drepung as the main place where Mongol monks were. But this really, I think, began later in the 17th century. And then in the 18th century, this really exploded. And then we have, you know, the kind of local regional houses at these monasteries that were housing Mongols from this region. But earlier on, it was a jaw to Tashilumpu as somewhere that was established by the Dalai Lamas. And also this is where the Panchen Lama resided during the time of the 4th Dalai Lama and the 5th Dalai Lama. So especially northern Mongols were really all streaming into Tashilumpu. And I have an account by the Alagśa Pandita where he arrived in Tibet in 1661, and he wanted to go to Sera, actually. But it says in his autobiography, when he stopped at Tashilumpu, all of the elderly monks from Halkha said, you should stay in Tashilumpu because this is where we've been staying since, you know, we've started coming to study in Tibet. So what this also, I think, suggests is if there were elderly monks studying in Tashilumpu in 1661 that were Mongols and they were elderly, had been there for a long time, then there must have been a tradition of studying there much, much earlier on. Whereas we often think of the mid-17th century as the beginning of Mongols going to study in Tibet, you know, like the tradition of really going there, getting geshe degrees and so forth. So it must be predated to a much earlier period, like beginning of 17th century, late 16th century. And the jaw seems to have been all about the Dalai Lamas and subsequently the Panchen Lama, probably because he was the, you know, main teacher of the 4th Dalai Lama after he arrived in Tibet.
A few answers ago, you were talking about the kind of politics and the power involved with these figures, and I'm struck by how these, you know, obviously the Dalai Lama is so central to Tibetan history, but Desi Sanggye Gyatso also, and he kind of disappears from central Tibetan history and then reappears here. And I was fascinated to hear, because I'm always talking to my students about the irony of the, you know, modern Chinese state declaring itself the, you know, having the authority to recognize the reincarnated lamas, right? And I didn't realize that they were denying that in certain places. And so I'd love to hear more about, you know, is this everywhere around Inner Mongolia? Is it Mongolians in Amdo also are denied this ability to reincarnate? Is it, you know, what are the politics, the contemporary politics around the recognition of reincarnation? And is it a fear of central Tibetan or Tibetan Buddhist presence in these far-flung regions that block on that?
So despite the central kind of restriction on reincarnate, there's 3 reincarnations that are allowed to be sought in Inner Mongolia, and that one is Olan-Gigan, the red Gigan reincarnation line. He's said to be red Mahakala. He's an Orthodox Lama in terms of where his origins are, and the previous incarnation was, you know, interim abbot of Kumbum Monastery, and the current reincarnation, he's 20 now, I think. When I met him, he was 16. He is in Kumbum, and that's where he's studying. There's 2 others. There's the Chagan Gigan, the white Gigan reincarnation, and I can't remember who the 3rd is off the top of my head, but there's 3. But those are officially recognized and have, you know, their Labrang's estate are very well endowed by the government, and they also play significant roles in the government association for Buddhism and religion and so forth. However, on the ground, there are locally recognized reincarnations and there's quite a few of them even to this day, who were recognized soon after the Cultural Revolution or had been recognized during or just before, who then grew up. And most of them are lay people, but they are referred to as Watuktus, Gagans, or Tulkus, and they're very much active in local regions. And they are engaged in kind of reconstruction efforts for monasteries and kind of, you know, rebuilding religion and disseminating texts and teachings, and are really revered by local population of Mongols. And there doesn't seem to be that much restriction on them from the government side of stopping their efforts, even though they're fairly wealthy, they get a lot of donations from the local people, and they are rebuilding these monasteries, and some are translating texts and disseminating these texts. So there's a monastery known as Sum in Horchin that has a reincarnation who is also known as Siddha. He was supposed to have been sent to Mongolia during the time of the 6th Dalai Lama, and he was known as a dreadlocked Habulgan. He was kind of a yogi figure, and currently it's the 8th reincarnation who's recognized locally. So despite this kind of restriction, they are active to an extent. However, they have had a break from, the traditional education. So none of them really studied in the large monastery. They didn't go through the Geshe examinations or the system, including figures such as Ajahn Rinpoche, who's one of the last kind of great Hotuktus. He was one of the 8 Hotuktus of Beijing. And the current reincarnation lives in Virginia. He has a center in Indiana. And he's a Mongol from Huknor and the main abbot of Kumbum Monastery. So he didn't receive a traditional education apart from in secret by his teachers at night. And he went to a Chinese school. But he is a monk. He kept his, Vinaya vows. And so again, these figures aren't really trained in that way of a traditional monk scholar, but the activities are much more on the ground with the local Buddhist communities and rebuilding projects. I hope that can answer the question.
Yeah, totally. Fantastic. I really want to hear more about this.
That's my mum.
Yeah, yes, she chimed in. The other is Dunkur, Hututu. I guess a Kala chakra.
So the Dunkur Hotuktu is the Dunkur Manjushri Hotuktu who traveled with the third Dalai Lama to the meeting with Aftan Han in Hoknor in 1577. And he was very young. I think he was like 13 at the time. So the 2 Hotuktus that accompanied the Dalai Lama were the Dunkur Hotukt and who was the other one? There was the other Manjushri Hotukt. Anyway, there were 2 young lamas who've since become like the beginnings of some of the most important Gelug reincarnation lineages from Utsang, from central Tibet. So Dunkur Hotukt, this current seat, again, there's a few, so it's a bit complicated. I'm not sure which one she's asking about. There was one that was alive during the time of the Dalai Lama who was active in Inner Mongolia and then also traveled extensively to Alagśa Mongolia, Northern Mongolia, and helped with the establishment of the first Gelug monastery in Alagśa. And he passed away in Mongolian lands. And that seat for that Dunkur Hotukt is currently at Labrang Monastery. And we do have a reincarnation there who's pretty young. I think he's in his late 20s or early 30s, who has been educated in a more traditional way. Because Labrang somehow has been able to keep a more scholastic tradition alive because it's further away from Utsang and, close enough to Kumbum that Kumbum got more of the fire compared to Labrang. So Labrang, when I visited last at least, it had more of a monastic college feel. So Dunkur Hotukt is based there, the current incarnation. Oh yeah, so what she's saying, I got it. I figured it out. Dunkur Hotukt is a 3rd reincarnation who's allowed to be sought for from the Chinese government side. Thank you, Mother.
Wonderful. Well, Lauren, this is, in terms of time, I think we've kept you over time, but thank you so much. And we really look forward to this work coming out in print.
No, thank you so much for having me and for your comments. And yeah, I mean, I'm almost done. So I keep finding more stuff. So that's a problem is,
It's a good problem to have. Thank you.
Thank you.